What's up, everybody? On today's video, we're going to talk about the Fair Housing Act law, a law that was meant to protect communities from discrimination in the real estate world, but it has actually led to hurting a lot of minority communities indirectly. Real estate values in African American communities have always been worth less than in white areas, because many times realtors were steering the customers away from these communities, preventing them from buying in these areas. So clearly, the intention of this law was to help African American communities develop real estate value. However, after many years of this law's implementation and changes in the way people buy homes, the way the law functions now is actually hurting a lot of minority communities. In essence, the goal of this law was to prevent realtors from saying, I wouldn't buy a house on the west side of town because that's the black part of the city. Well, that's not really happening anymore. Most of the time, a buyer has the tools available today with social media, technology, websites like Google, websites like YouTube that have a lot of information, and they can research exactly where they want to be. And most realtors are already going to expect the customer to know exactly where they want to end up before they even start a home search. Today, in practice, it's the buyer's budget that determines how nice of a neighborhood they're going to end up in, not so much the neighborhood's race. This law has made it impossible for realtors to even mention anything about race or the composition of a neighborhood to a buyer, because in theory that should be an irrelevant matter. However, there's a huge flaw with this law. The intention of these laws was to prevent minority communities from being discriminated. However, the law also prevents realtors from telling minorities if there's a danger to them in an area, because they're not allowed to talk about race. And that is where I think that this law needs to be changed or completely eliminated at this point. If there's a danger to a minority moving into a particular area, that buyer needs to know. In theory, it's okay for a white person, according to this law, to move into a minority community because you can't discriminate them on a real estate perspective, which has actually led to gentrification, which has made life harder on African American communities. And unbeknownst to the people that made this law, there's actually a lot of racism within African American communities against white people, which means that a white person moving to a black area could easily be a target of crime and discrimination themselves. Vice versa, if a black person moves into a rural community where they don't want African Americans, that realtor is now putting the buyer in a huge predicament. That would result in a negative effect not on the real estate market, but on the family that you're dealing with. Basically, you can't make a law to prevent segregation and racism. This is embedded in American people and in American society. And what this law has actually done is it's actually put people in fairly vulnerable positions. Now, you may not know this because of your particular circumstances, but if you're Hispanic and you move to a rural area in the Deep South, chances are you're gonna have to move out for your safety. There are small towns in the United States that if a African American or Asian or Hispanic family were to move to, quite literally their lives would be in danger. They would find difficulty finding employment. They would be targeted by law enforcement, and at some point they could even be in prison unjustly. Simply, they would be denied employment, services, both public and government. And if anybody in the comments section wants to say that's not true, go screw yourself dearly. It's 2023. We're not stupid. Everybody knows what's going on in the United States right now. And by pretending that these situations don't exist, you're actually playing into the part of the perpetrators by helping them cover up what's going on. So please shut the crap up. If I see your comments saying that I'm a liar and these things don't happen, I'm just going to block you from the channel. One, because you're lying, and two, because you know you're lying. And if you don't know you're lying because you're misinformed or stupid at this point, then you should shut up and stop saying things you don't know, because this is happening to people all over the United States. It's happened to my family, and I get emails almost weekly from people telling me their bad experiences. I lived this situation myself. I've heard other people's experiences. When I listen to their experiences, they seem to be exactly the same thing that I lived through. And enough is enough. I don't want to hear your stupidity. I think most people in the United States at this point are aware that if an Asian family were to move to a small town in Alabama or Arkansas, they would receive a visit from a quote-unquote church, aka the freaking Klan. In the case of me and my wife, when we moved to Alabama, they wanted to see our DNA. They wanted to see our ancestry, where it turns out that our ancestry is actually whiter than the people that came knocking on my door. In the case of my wife, her ancestry goes back to the 1700s. All of it is registered. In the case of me, my freaking grandparents were born in Europe. So it's quite offensive to have a mutt of a hick that's a mix of every type of European try to tell me that he's whiter than me when my grandparents came from Spain. That did not prevent these idiots from continuing to harass us until the point we had to sell our house in Alabama, which just goes to show that if a minority, let's say a dark Hispanic who doesn't have the green eyes and blonde hair like I do, and doesn't have the ability to at least camouflage in public, were to end up in a place like this, that their life would be a complete freaking misery. So we see that these laws that are putting families in these situations are not preventing discrimination, they're actually creating victims. Now, I don't know about you, but if I had to pick between preventing discrimination and protecting victims, I would most definitely go with the option of protecting a victim. And today, African American communities, which is the primary community being protected by these laws, are actually in themselves a huge source of discrimination, contempt, and outright violence to anybody who encroaches on their communities. Take, for example, the realtor who sold me the house in Alabama. He had to pick between two evils, to put me in a black community or to put me in a white community. Now, he thought we would be safer in a white community, so he told me, Jose, I'm not personally racist or anything. In fact, I love Popeye's chicken, Jose, but these black people are gonna freaking kill you if you move out here. And he wasn't lying. If I had moved to the original home that I wanted in a black community in Montgomery, Alabama, chances are those black people pretty much were going to kill me. In the time that I lived in this Montgomery metropolitan area, I was constantly being targeted by African Americans for robberies because the black people believe that if they rob a Hispanic, the white law enforcement will not get involved, which is absolutely true. They won't. So if African American gangs were driving far into the suburbs to seek out Hispanics to rob them like they did in my case, imagine how much more vulnerable I would have been if I had ended up in an African American community in Alabama. Now, most situations are not going to be that extreme. We're talking about Montgomery, Alabama, where a simple dispute over a parking spot turns into a race riot. Interestingly enough, before that event became viral, you guys might remember me sharing a story about how I saw a car accident in Montgomery, Alabama turn into a race riot, completely uncalled for. So we know that the city of Montgomery, Alabama, where I moved to, is definitely an extreme case. I believe that if an Asian family calls a realtor in a small town, that realtor should freely have the ability to tell that person that in this community there's an imminent danger to them for being Asian. And while telling that person that may actually play into racism, if the realtor is racist, that might just be an indication of what everybody else in that community is like. And by letting that person know what they're going to face, you're actually protecting them. And I know that sounds a little troubling to some people, but it's the truth. If you're going to move into a community and you're not welcome in that area, you might as well have a freaking warning. And to be honest, I had to go through 6 realtors in Alabama before I found a realtor who even called me back. That might have been a clue to somebody who's racist or has been around racism to know that maybe there's a problem here. But the reality is, if you're coming from a place that's not racist, like me coming from South Florida, those subtle hints are not clear to you because you've never been around racism. You have to be direct to people who've never been around a racist environment and say, hey, Mr. Asian person, there's a clear danger to you moving here. So now you have a law that was created to protect black minorities, and this law is now starting to hurt African Americans who are starting to move to rural communities, Hispanics, and Asians as well. Have you guys noticed that when I'm speaking in a negative light, I'll say black, and when it's in a positive light, I'll say African American? See, that is a subtle clue. Some of you guys may have noticed it. A lot of you guys may not have noticed it. But we can see how these Fair Housing Act laws need to be eliminated or updated because their intention was to protect families from discrimination, but now it's actually playing a bigger role into putting people in the way more vulnerable positions. Take the city of Atlanta, for example. Let's pretend like the city of Atlanta, the south side isn't black, the north side isn't white, and along Buford Highway is all the diversity. If a Hispanic or Asian person were to obtain enough money to live in a suburban area, it's most likely going to be on the northeast side of the city. It's not going to be on the south black area or the deep white towards Marietta. Even Europeans and Eastern Europeans that move to the Atlanta area are ending up in the northeast side. And I've talked to people who've lived in that area who are minorities, and they tell me that even there, they've had difficulties. Take the case of an Arab person that I met in San Diego, California. They told me that at some point they lived in the Atlanta area and they dealt with a lot of discrimination, and that in California they are more comfortable and they feel much safer in regards to racism. He did mention, however, that in San Diego, California, his business was being extorted by the local law enforcement, but he felt safer paying an extortion for safety than in Atlanta, where he felt completely vulnerable. So in the United States, for some people, Arabics, Asians, and other really small groups, like perhaps Eastern Europeans, they may find themselves that no matter where they go, you just can't get rid of the inherent racism that exists in the United States. But I do believe that realtors should have the freedom to tell their customers if they feel that living in a particular place could be hurtful for them. The good thing is that a good portion of realtors are actually willing to violate the Fair Housing Act laws to tell their customers if something isn't going to work out for them, which puts them in a liability to protect their customers. However, a lot of realtors are not willing to break those laws. For example, my wife is a realtor, and in her case, if you talk to her, you need to know exactly where you need to end up first because she's not going to violate the Fair Housing Act laws. But in the case of the realtor that I dealt with in Alabama, he had no problem violating Fair Housing Act laws to let me know what was best for me. Now, when I moved back to Florida, I actually dealt with steering in Florida. The realtor that I hired or that I was talking to at the time wanted to put me in Lehigh Acres simply because I was Hispanic. Now, I did not want to live in Lehigh Acres, and I told her clearly I do not want to be in Lehigh Acres. However, for some reason, this realtor insisted that I had to end up in Lehigh Acres because I was Hispanic. Now, she didn't openly say it, but I could tell that this realtor was trying to steer me towards Lehigh Acres. So I dropped that realtor and picked up another realtor who also did the same thing. She was trying to steer me into Lehigh Acres. Now, steering and informing your customer of a danger are two totally different things. In the case of steering, you're pushing somebody into a minority community when there's no imminent threat. In the case of Florida, for example, there's absolutely no threat to a Hispanic living in a nice white area. I personally, as a Hispanic, like living in white areas. I've lived in Buckingham, a completely white area, although now it's starting to grow in the Hispanic and black population. When I first moved to Buckingham, it might have been 96% white. 20 years of my life were in North Naples. When I first moved to North Naples, it was 99% white. Now it's possibly, I don't know, maybe 80% white, but still. I've lived in majority white neighborhoods in Florida, and I've never had threats to my safety, imminent threats to my safety. So there's no reason for a realtor to steer me into Lehigh Acres when there isn't a threat for me to be in a white area of Southwest Florida. So in the case of Florida, for example, there's a difference clearly between steering and preventing somebody from being in a harmful situation. In my case, the realtors were clearly trying to steer me because I had already even lived in these white areas and I knew what I wanted, but they consistently wanted to push me into an area that was mostly Hispanic. So that right there constitutes steering, not protecting your customer. And I actually paid a lawyer out of pocket to explain to me how these laws work. And there's a very unfortunate reality when it comes to the Fair Housing Act laws. If you encounter racism on the part of a realtor trying to steer you, and you go to a real estate attorney, even if you pay out of pocket, because they won't take these cases for free, your real estate attorney will most likely tell you that there's nothing he can do. He'll tell you that you can make a claim to the proper authority and report that. But in my case, those realtors still have their license. Remarkable considering that one of the realtors that we dealt with did the whole thing through text messages, and I had solid, concrete evidence that this realtor was not only trying to steer me into Lehigh Acres, but once they became agitated, they even used slurs against me. Now, this was a really dumb, stupid New Jersey transplant who felt that she could use slurs against people freely and they weren't going to take it to a lawyer and try to get her sued over it. Unfortunately, my real estate attorney was not able to do anything about the situation. He simply told me that I could file a complaint, but most likely nothing would happen, and nothing really did happen to this realtor. So here's a real estate law that's putting people in danger, yet when somebody actually breaks the law to steer somebody, it's not being punished in any way at all. Steering still takes place, and it's taking place from a racist perspective. In the case of Southwest Florida, there are barely any African American communities, and those African American communities are welcoming to outsiders. So in the case of Southwest Florida, these steering laws really are not protecting the African American communities at all. And most realtors are completely oblivious to the fact these laws exist. And a lot of realtors, unfortunately, don't even have a problem steering customers into particular areas. The dynamic of racial relationships varies from place to place, and if you have a uniform law that covers the entire country, it's definitely going to leave a lot of room open for possibilities that are unfortunate. In the case of Southwest Florida, realtors are steering Hispanics into places like Lehigh Acres or Golden Gate City. However, if those minorities are to lawyer up and try to protect themselves, or at least put up a red flag about a realtor who's doing this, there's no protection from the Fair Housing Act. Now here's another scenario. In Orlando, Florida, an African American person with a criminal record and a lawyer who's his friend go around baiting realtors and getting those realtors to say the wrong thing. When those realtors say the wrong thing, they go after those realtors to sue them. So in most cases, the real victims are not able to find a lawyer to defend them from steering in the real estate world, but a convicted felon with his scumbag realtor friend are able to go out there and set up realtors for lawsuits of discrimination back to back. Now, I'm not going to elaborate on the details of how that scam works because I don't want to put on people to bad ideas. But we can clearly see how a lot of times these laws are being exploited by some, and the people that they're supposed to protect are actually left vulnerable. If you're a realtor and watching this video, or somebody else in the real estate world, I know that you agree with what I'm saying, and what you could possibly do is forward my video to other people in the real estate world. Have an open dialogue about this subject with your real estate team, and then move that forward to your real estate boards so that these changes can be implemented, because these laws are affecting the buyers. I am by no means suggesting that we leave the African American community vulnerable, which was the original intention of this law. Unfortunately, you can't just make a law for one particular group of people and then ignore everybody else's needs. And honestly, I don't know how a new law could be implemented to cover all these bases, since the way I look at it, if I called a realtor and they told me that the Klan is active in a certain community, well, that would in itself be a very disturbing conversation, and I would feel hurt by it, and I may want to even lawyer up against the situation. It definitely wouldn't be a pleasant experience to call a realtor and be like, hey, my name's Jose. Oh, you're Jose. No, we don't like Jose's here in this county, sir. Yeah, I can see how that would also be a problem. It's a distasteful situation that falls on the hands of realtors. Perhaps maybe that responsibility shouldn't even fall on the hands of a realtor. Maybe there should just be a source of information, an application, or a website link from the board of realtors that tells people, hey, we've had this problem. For example, 5 Asian sellers reported that the reason they moved out of this community was due to racism or crime, for example. I'm not sure. Maybe this is something that happens after the sale. Maybe it's a voluntary survey that a seller can take after the sale's been completed to let other buyers after thus. For example, a few months after you move out of a community, you sold the house, the new buyers moved in, confidentially, the seller can say, hey, the reason I moved out of this community was due to crime, racism, or other relevant topics. Now, a problem arises that many of the whites and blacks, who are by percentage a larger number of the population, could easily distort these figures based on their personal opinions. But let's say I'm an Asian or a Hispanic. If there's only been 10 Asian families in a small town and 6 of them left due to racism, I think that's some very useful information. And I do believe that buyers should have access to who left a neighborhood, and if the reason they left that neighborhood was due to discrimination. Maybe we should create an app, let's say, where people could report racism if they're a buyer. You'd have to be able to verify this somehow. Probably be great if the real estate boards were part of it. Say, hey, Asian people have had problems in freaking Huntsville, Texas or something. You know what I mean? That sounds, I've never been there, but it just sounds like it'd be racist. Just tossing around ideas. I don't know. Like I said, if realtors got together and they were able to openly talk about this topic and then move it forward to the real estate boards, or maybe I could go up to a real estate board and talk to them about this issue, but it needs to be talked about. We need to have this conversation because I think it's so relevant that I'm slapping my hands while talking to you. Well, anyways, I really don't know what the practical solution to this problem will be, but I do know that the current Fair Housing Act laws are leaving a lot of people vulnerable. I think if African American people are moving to a small town and then they have to move out because of racism, then maybe we need to know about that. I think some real estate boards, like let's say Sarasota, they would want that because they're catering to a lot of Asian customers. But I can see how a small town in Texas or Alabama would be like, we don't want this. We don't want this at all. I think the Asian buyer is an incredible element to the real estate world. They're usually buying high-end properties. They got cash money most of the time. They're really great buyers, and we should protect their interests. And Asians have no problem investing in African American communities. In fact, I think Asians are maybe in some places disproportionately investing more in African American communities than they are in other places. I think Asians, they don't really care about the racial tensions. They just care about the profit. Endemically, there are plenty of African American communities throughout the entire United States. That's why this law exists. Asians, they don't have too many communities. Maybe a little bit in California, but there really aren't these huge Asian communities, with a few exceptions here and there. Asians are not only willing to bring their businesses to different parts of the country, they are eager to find a place where they can set up shop and be successful, even if they have nothing in common with the people or the demographics of that place. They'll move there in order to establish businesses. Alright guys, as always, let me hear your thoughts and opinions on this interesting topic. Do you think the Fair Housing Act laws need to be changed? Do you think they're doing more harm than good? I think for the most part, most realtors don't want to steer their customers, don't want to discriminate their customers, but they do want to be able to have a frank conversation with the customer about what's best for them. But I do understand the notion of transaction brokerage and just being there for the transaction, not being there for the financial advice. I'm open-minded to the idea that perhaps that responsibility shouldn't even fall on the hands of a realtor. In the case of Miss New Jersey Sunshine, it would definitely open the doors wide open for steering. So let's be clear. I don't like steering. Crap, I've even paid lawyers to go after realtors who tried to steer me. But there's a difference between advising a customer about an area versus steering. Steering is determining where somebody's going to end up in general, saying, hey, you have to end up in this particular area. But warning somebody is saying, hey, this area may not be the right one for you. In the case of Bradenton, Florida, where I live, surprisingly, a house in a bad Hispanic neighborhood cost as much as a house in a nice suburban white area. So that's kind of interesting. Now, when it comes to African American communities in Sarasota, Bradenton, it's definitely different. It looks like today a house in an African American neighborhood is worth about 1/3 of what it would be worth in a white neighborhood in the Sarasota area. Now, you do have to be honest, and I know honesty hurts a lot of people. The house that's worth 1/3 less does have beer cans, dump truck tires, and 10 homeless people in a homeless camp across the street. It's a hood hangout spot. Not everybody's gonna want that. But I find it interesting that a Hispanic area with the same exact hangout spot, garbage, homeless camp scenario, in a Hispanic area, it doesn't affect real estate prices as much. So yes, it is unfortunate that in Sarasota, these African American communities, the real estate property values are less. But let me ask you this. In a moment where people are even going homeless, why aren't white people moving into these affordable houses? Well, the buyers, the white buyers, are scared to move into these African American communities. That is why these properties are worth less, since whites are the overwhelming majority of the population by number. For some people, it could definitely be a racial tension why they won't buy in these neighborhoods. But for a lot of people, it's not about a racial tension. It's just outright fear. And unfortunately, that fear isn't based on hate or discrimination. It's based on real life experiences. 3 years ago or 4 years ago, when I moved to Alabama, I had no problem moving into an African American community. When I moved to the Montgomery area, I didn't care if it was a white or black area. Crap, if I was racist and only wanted to be around my own people, I would have moved to Miami to be around nothing but Cubans like myself. I didn't move to Miami. I moved to a completely different state where I had nothing in common with these people, and I didn't really care about their demographic being different. It didn't matter to me then. But now that I live there, now I'm actually afraid of African American communities to live in. Why? Well, I'll tell you why. It's not based on racism. It's based on real life experience that when I lived in Montgomery, I was constantly being targeted by African Americans for robberies. The same thing can be said about Hispanics. A lot of people have a lot of prejudice against Hispanics because Hispanics have a bad reputation of our own in certain categories. This is a really touchy subject. I know most people will not bring this subject to the internet, and definitely most people will never have an open conversation about this topic. For example, we have Haitians and Jamaicans here in South Florida. I've lived around Haitians and Jamaicans, and I never had a problem. If I found out that a Haitian or a Jamaican moved in across the street from me or next door to me, I would be thrilled because I love their culture, I love their food. I have African American neighbors where I live now. They are really decent African Americans. There's just a difference between like an inner city Montgomery African American and the decent African Americans that I have here where I live in Southwest Florida. I have African American people who talk to me and they tell me I don't want to live around other African Americans. Hey, I'm a Hispanic and I don't exactly want to live around other Hispanics. Now, after being exposed to racism from blacks and after being exposed to racism from whites, even though it's not my main preference, in the future when I move, I may consider wanting to end up in a place like Miami where it's all Hispanics, not because I inherently carry racism within me. Here's something interesting. I personally like to do business with whites more than Hispanics, but for my safety, I may want to live in a Hispanic community. It happens the same thing with Americans and whites and blacks, actually. Despite the fact that whites and blacks in Alabama don't get along, a lot of the black people go work in white communities, and a lot of white people somehow work in inner cities. Take Jacksonville, Florida, where the white people live in St. Johns County, but they commute to Jacksonville to work. The same thing can be said about Birmingham, Alabama, where the white people work in Birmingham, Alabama, but then they commute to the suburbs to live. Can I be real? Can I be open with you guys? Or can I not? Do I have to sugarcoat things for the internet, or can I be real? I used to have a junk removal business in Naples, Florida. And when I had my business, even though I'm Hispanic, when another Hispanic would call me, I frankly didn't want to answer the call because my own people were the first ones that would always try to pay you less or try to exploit you on job sites. When I had the choice to choose my customers, I would exclusively deal with other races and not with myself. And I think in the workplace, we look at things very differently than we do in the community. And it's the case for myself, and it's the case for a lot of white Americans who, despite the fact they don't want to live in a black neighborhood, they want to work in a black city. What's the old saying? Familiarity breeds contempt. And a lot of times in the workplace, we may want to deal with people that are not like us, because if somebody feels familiar with you, then they can start with that finesse game. But if somebody is different than you, you have to go about a certain level of respect. And in the workplace, that's definitely a true factor. As you guys know, I don't accept social racism against Hispanics. But I understand economical racism against Hispanics. Why? See, I'm a Hispanic, okay? And I, as a Hispanic, don't want to cater to other Hispanic customers when I had a service-based business, because I understand they're bad customers. So if right now I call a white person on the phone that I've never met and I tell them my last name is Rodriguez, and I can tell that the company that I'm calling has a business-based, customer-client relationship-based prejudice against me, while I don't like it, I totally understand it. Because when I had my business, I didn't want to deal with other Hispanic customers as well. I have, on a normal basis, have to deal with a business type of prejudice because I'm Hispanic and I understand where it's coming from. So if right now I call a moving company, let's say, and a guy's gonna come move a couch for me, and the guy's like, "Hey Jose, it's $800, right? It's not up for negotiation or nothing like that." If somebody says that to me, I understand where they're coming from because I understand that I've had a business and I have seen that not even I want my own race to be my own customer. So as African Americans, they have to also realize that, all right, your community is worth less in real estate. Maybe you're not good neighbors. Could that be part of the problem? Now, I'm not coming at you from a racist perspective because, again, I'm a Hispanic and I don't want to live around other Hispanics. So here's somebody who's on the same playing field as you telling you, hey, man, maybe it's not an outward problem. Maybe it's an inward problem that you have to look at. Now, we're all the same and we should all be treated with the same level of respect and dignity, and we all have the same rights. But each one of us has different cultures and different customs, and when you deal with different people, you have to understand different things. Give you an example. Let's say I'm going to buy a truck from a dealership. Guess what? Even though I'm a Hispanic, I don't want a Hispanic salesman. I want my salesman to be a redneck, or I want my salesman to be a black guy. I really prefer my salesman not to be another Hispanic like me, because I feel that this salesperson is going to feel too comfortable with the notion and may end up trying to take advantage of me. Sometimes in business, a little bit of racial tension isn't bad. It keeps everybody in place. In the case of my redneck salesperson, when I approach him, I'm like, hey man, I want a brand new pickup truck and I'm paying cash. What's the problem with that? Well, for one, I'm a 33-year-old Hispanic male. And if my salesperson questions how I don't have that kind of money, he's absolutely entitled to believe that, because most Hispanic kids my age are not buying a $50,000 truck cash like I did. So what do? I approach my redneck salesman, which is the one that I want to go to. I overlooked a Hispanic salesman on purpose, because if I go to a Hispanic salesperson and I show him that I have this money cash, and he's Hispanic like me, he's going to draw all types of prejudices based on his perceived understanding of me. Now, I'm talking business here. So if you're a broke piece of crap who's never had any money, you don't know what I'm talking about. But if you've had some money, then you know where I'm getting with this. I'll be like, hey man, look, Billy, here's my bank account. I got $140,000 in the bank. The truck is $50,000. Now we're talking a different language, because what's going to happen is if I don't show Billy that I have the money, in the back of his mind, he's wondering, is this guy wasting my time? Now, why would he wonder that? Is it because Billy's racist, hates Hispanics, and wishes that none of us had that kind of money? No. You know why Billy feels that way? Billy feels that way because every Hispanic person that walks to that lot, let's not say every, let's just say a disturbing amount of the Cubans like me that he deals with walk in there with a gold chain, talk about, oh yeah, papi, I got a lot of money, man. I buy this whole dealership if I want to, papi. They go in there boastful, disrespectful, demanding things, acting like they're freaking loaded, talking about they're going to pay for a truck for cash. But the difference is that when they go to check out, then they're like, oh yeah, papi, I noticed you offer financing. No, you didn't notice that I offer financing. You are boastful and you're broke. You're pretending. You're plagiarizing. You're acting like you got all this money. But now when we're doing the paperwork, oh, what happened to all that cash money? Now you don't have the $3,000 down payment. You only got $1,500. When you walk through the front door, you were acting like Tony Montana. But now that we're doing the paperwork, you're acting like Tony doesn't make enough money for this truck payment. So what do I do as a customer? Do I get offended if the salesperson is questioning whether I can afford the truck? No. You know what I do? Hey, Billy, I'm Jose. Let's log into my Bank of America. Oh, I got $140,000. Okay, so now you understand that I'm a serious customer, Billy? Oh, yes, sir, I understand. Okay, let's go out there and look at trucks now. Now, does that mean that I have a prejudice against Billy? No. I understand that Billy has a prejudice against me as a Hispanic, a well-founded freaking prejudice, because I myself was a salesperson and I dealt with these Cubans just like me all the time. They pull up in an F-350 with a gold chain on their phone with their buddy. Oh yeah, mi hermano, hey, no, I'm gonna buy cash, papi, I got a lot of money, man. So you know the first thing that I would do is I would call their bluff on the spot. You walk in there with an F-350 and a gold chain and on your phone with your buddy, talk about, oh, I'm Cuban, man, I just moved here from Miami. I got a lot of money, papi. You know what I would do? Like, okay, let's look at your address. Yeah, what's your address? Let's look it up right now, because we had to pull permits for the property. You know, it was a self-position, we pulled permits. So I was like, okay, let me see your property address. Okay, so they would walk in acting like they had a boat and they needed to build a structure for their boat. Turns out his mother-in-law was moving in and they were building a structure to house his mother-in-law. And despite the fact he acted like he had cash money, he actually needed to go with a financing. Not a regular financing, he had to go with a rent-to-own financing because his credit wasn't good enough to actually get approved for it. Now keep in mind that despite the fact I am Hispanic, I don't exactly look Hispanic, I look more like an American. So his wife walks in and in Spanish says to him,
Vas a ver a dónde tú vas a meter a mi madre, que no sea una cajita esa chiquita, porque tú vas a meter.
She didn't think I understood what she said. But anyways, even the rent-to-own, which had approved every single person that walked through that door, denied this guy. But when he walked through the door, he walked in there like he was a boss, pretending like he had money. Of course, if you're a salesperson, I don't care if you have money or not. Hey, bro, you don't need a stunt on the salesperson. There's nothing you need to prove to me. You just need to prove it when we scan your card if there's enough funds or not. Because I remember, Americans would pull up, in a Hyundai, and it's not a new Hyundai either, and they walk out there with maybe a cane in their hand. They walk slowly to the door. Hey, I'm Larry. But when it comes to signing that bill, Larry had no problem with his card being declined. Larry had enough money. So as a Hispanic, I understand the prejudice that people have against us, but I understand it because I'm realistic that even I as a Hispanic don't like the way other Hispanic people do business. So why wouldn't I be understanding of somebody having a prejudice against me if I'm well aware of the reason why people have a prejudice against me? Now, there are situations where it's unwarranted. For example, I've been in a company for now over a year. They understand that I show up on time, my customers are happy, I'm being productive, my workstation is clean, I don't have any problems. At this point, I approach my manager, I'm like, hey man, I'm more qualified than all these other idiots you got here. You've seen my work ethic, you know it's time for me to move up on the scale. My boss tells me, oh, well, you're not white. Now that's a problem, okay? Because now you're denying me equal treatment. So I'm not against equal treatment. I'm just understanding of prejudices that are well-founded. In the case of this situation, it wasn't acceptable that the company wouldn't promote me, even though they understood that I was more qualified. And a problem that we do have in Southwest Florida, not so much in the real estate world, but in the labor force, is that once I prove to you that I'm a good employee, I have all the credentials, I have all the professionalism, why now, because I'm Hispanic, you're going to hold me back, even though in credentials, I have all the ability to be better than anybody else. See, now at that point, it is a problem. So we have to understand that there are situations where you have to understand prejudices, and there are situations where it's completely unacceptable. If I'm working for you and you know that I'm completely able to carry out my job occupation successfully, you can't put an imbecile that doesn't have the same skills as me to be my boss when I can do his job better than him. See, in that circumstance, it is a problem. If an African American person moves into my community, I'm going to treat them just like I would treat everybody else. And in fact, I'm going to treat them a little better to confirm to them that they're welcome in that community, because there are situations where they're not welcome. And it varies from community to community. There are communities where I talk to African Americans and they tell me that their white community is exceptionally well at treating them right. And I talk to other African Americans who tell me they have a very difficult time. Take my personal experiences. In Alabama, socially, I had a very difficult time dealing with the white population. However, in Southwest Florida, it's actually even more affluent. They have more money, and I haven't had any social issues in the community with living around white people. But I have had it in the labor force. And ironically, in Alabama, when I was working for other people, there were absolutely no problems. I would actually rather have my customer be an Alabamian because they pay better. They're just much better customers. I had great experiences. If you guys remember when I first moved to Alabama, I was so happy with my newfound customer base. Both African Americans and whites would pay me so much better than in Southwest Florida. But as neighbors, they were horrible. I say all that because I want you guys to understand that business and community are two totally different aspects. But in real estate, you're trying to combine business with community, two things that act very differently. So in combining these two completely uncompatible worlds of community versus business, where sometimes you could have a great business relationship but a bad community relationship, I really feel like whites and blacks in the United States have a bad community relationship. And what I want you guys to understand is, hey, don't let your bad community relationship get in the way of our good business transactions. But I do want to present to you guys the idea, as odd as it seems, that the way we treat a particular group in the community isn't the same way we treat them in business. And what I've noticed is that in this case of being accepted in the community or wanting to be part of a community isn't the most advantageous business decision, and vice versa. Sounds complicated? It really is. Alright guys, it's definitely time for us to end today's video. It's a very long video packed with a lot of information, but I do think it is time for us to revise the Fair Housing Act laws and put them in accordance with what we're actually seeing on the ground today. The world changed a lot. Racial tensions are different today. Everything's different today, and people have different real estate needs today than they have in the past.